The ship was quiet. It moved through space like a slow breath, steady and careful, far from home. The UES Resolute was humanity's first real diplomatic vessel. It was not a warship. It carried no weapons. It had been built to talk, not to fight. And yet, sitting inside it, Ambassador Lena Vasquez felt the cold weight of something she could not name pressing down on her chest. She stood in front of a wide observation window and looked out at the stars. They were beautiful. They had always been beautiful to her, even as a child growing up in Buenos Aires, lying on rooftops and staring up at them. Back then, they had felt like a promise, like something waiting for humanity at the end of a long journey. Now they felt like eyes. Admiral Darren Cole walked up beside her. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a calm face that gave away very little. He had fought in 3 wars in his life and had learned long ago that the best thing a soldier could do before a battle was rest his face. He handed her a cup of coffee and said nothing for a moment. "You read the summons again?" he asked. 4 times, she said. "Did it change?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Then let's go." The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was not what either of them had expected. They had imagined something cold and mechanical, the way humans often imagined alien spaces. But it was almost warm. The walls curved upward like the inside of a great shell, lit by soft amber light. Hundreds of seats arranged in wide rings, filled with beings of every shape and color, looked down at a single raised platform in the center. That platform was where Lena and Cole now stood. 47 species, 200,000 years of shared history. And at the very top of the chamber, seated above all others, was the being called Vreth Kal. He was tall and thin, with pale silver skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His species, the Serenthi, were the oldest members of the council. They had been traveling between stars when humans were still drawing animals on cave walls. He looked down at the 2 humans with the kind of expression a person might give to an insect they were about to step on. Not angry, not cruel, just entirely certain of what they were about to do. The charges were read by a council speaker, a small creature with 4 arms and a voice like grinding stone. The words came through the translation device in Lena's ear as flat and clean as a death sentence. Humanity was classified as a Tier 0 extinction risk. The reasoning was laid out in careful, almost academic language. Humans were too aggressive. Their biology made them prone to violence. Their emotional responses were unstable and unpredictable. Their technological development had happened too fast, in too short a time, without proper guidance. And worst of all, they had reached FTL travel without permission, without oversight, and without any understanding of the rules that governed civilized space. The Council had seen this before. Species like humanity, young and hungry and dangerous, were not allowed to survive. It was not personal. It was policy. Lena stood very still while the charges were read. She had been a diplomat for 20 years. She had sat across from warlords and dictators and people who had done terrible things. She had learned to keep her face blank and her voice level. But her hands, held behind her back, were pressed into fists so tight that her knuckles had gone white. When the speaker finished, Vreth Kal raised one long hand. The vote began. It moved through the chamber quickly, too quickly, like the whole thing had already been decided before they walked in the door. Species after species pressed their markers. The count appeared on a screen above the chamber floor, visible to everyone. 44 in favor of annihilation, 3 abstentions, 0 against. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then Vreth Kal spoke. His voice came through the translator as something calm and precise, like a machine reading numbers. The sentence is finalized. The species known as humanity is ordered to cease biological activity within 72 standard hours. You will return to your world. You will inform your people. There will be no negotiation, no appeal, and no extension. The Serenthi Armada will arrive at your system when the period has passed. If any resistance is encountered, the process will be accelerated. You are dismissed. He said it the way someone might say, "The meeting is over." Lena did not move for a long moment. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien eyes watched her. Some of them looked curious. Some looked away. A few, she noticed, did not look comfortable. But none of them spoke. She thought about Earth. She thought about the cities and the noise and the billion small, ordinary things that filled a human day. She thought about children in schoolyards and old men in parks and late-night kitchens and arguments about nothing and laughter for no reason at all. She thought about everything that the word humanity actually meant when you stripped away politics and history and left only the raw, breathing, stubborn fact of people being alive. Then she looked up at Vrethkal and said, in a voice that carried clearly through the entire chamber, "You have just made the worst mistake in the history of this galaxy." No one responded. The chamber stayed quiet. Vrethkal looked at her the way one might look at a stone that had somehow spoken, briefly surprised, and then immediately dismissive. He lowered his hand. 2 guards stepped forward to escort the humans out. Cole said nothing as they walked back through the corridor to the docking bay. He said nothing as they boarded the Resolute and sealed the hatch. He said nothing as the ship pulled away from the council station and turned back toward human space, the stars shifting slowly across the window. When they were far enough away, he sat down at the communications console. He typed 11 characters into the encrypted frequency that connected to Earth's Unified Defense Command. Not a long message. Not a speech. Just one word. Prometheus. Then he leaned back in his chair, looked at the ceiling, and closed his eyes. Lena sat across from him, her coffee untouched and cold. Outside the window, the stars looked exactly as they always had, but something about them had changed. They were not a promise anymore. They were a battlefield. She picked up the cold coffee and drank it anyway. 72 hours. That was what the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy had given the human race before it sent ships to kill every last one of them. Lena thought that 72 hours was probably enough. The word Prometheus hit Earth's Unified Defense Command like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples moved fast. Within 4 minutes of receiving Cole's transmission, every military command center on the planet went to its highest alert level. Screens lit up. Doors that had not been opened in years were unlocked. People who had been waiting for a signal they hoped would never come looked at each other, took a breath, and got to work. In Geneva, deep below the old city, in a facility that did not appear on any public map, Dr. Yusra Okafor was already awake. She had been awake for 6 hours, watching the encrypted feed from the Resolute as the vote went through the council chamber. When the word came, she did not look surprised. She did not panic. She simply picked up her pen, opened the thick notebook on her desk, and drew a clean line through the top item on a very long list. She was 53 years old, short, with silver hair she kept cut close to her head, and eyes that moved constantly, taking in everything. She had spent the last 18 years of her life building Prometheus. Not the weapon systems, not the ships. Those were just tools. She had built the idea of it, the doctrine, the strategy, the philosophy of how a young and outnumbered species could fight the oldest government in the galaxy and survive. Her principle was simple, and she had written it on the first page of that notebook in large letters the day she started. Don't fight the Council's war. Fight yours. Because humanity could not win a fair fight. No one expected them to try. The first thing Prometheus did was wake up the solar defense grid. It had been built slowly, quietly, over the course of 11 years. Piece by piece, disguised as mining equipment, satellite relays, and deep space research platforms. Hundreds of railgun platforms hidden among the asteroids of the belt. Kinetic kill vehicles sleeping in cold orbits between Mars and Jupiter. Gravity lens emitters anchored in the ice fields of the outer system, capable of bending a ship's own propulsion energy back against it. None of it had ever been tested in a real fight, but it had been tested 10,000 times in simulation. And Dr. Okafor had never been satisfied with a simulation that ended in anything less than total victory. Now it powered on. Slowly, like a creature waking from deep sleep, the grid came alive across the solar system. Weapons that had been cold for years cycled up to operating temperature. Targeting systems checked themselves against updated star charts. Communication relays linked every platform into a single synchronized network that could be commanded from Geneva, from the carrier fleet, or from any one of the 12 off-world colonies. Those colonies were the second thing Prometheus activated. Humanity had 12 colonies spread across 4 star systems within 100 light-years of Earth. Most people thought of them as settlements, places where people farmed or mined or built, the slow infrastructure of expansion. They were that. But inside each colony, buried under the surface, were command bunkers, weapons caches, FTL-capable warships locked in dry dock, and enough autonomous manufacturing capacity to build more. The colonies were not just population centers. They were fortresses. Each one could fight independently. Each one had its own command authority. You could destroy Earth entirely, and the war would continue. That was the point. You could not win against humanity by cutting off its head. Humanity had spent too much of its own history learning exactly how that kind of strategy worked, and had made very sure it would not work against them. In the cities of Earth, the news reached ordinary people in waves. First, through official channels calm, measured announcements asking people to stay home and stay calm. Then, through the internet, which was never calm about anything. There was fear. Of course there was fear. There was arguing and crying, and people holding their children tighter than usual. There were protests outside government buildings from people who thought surrender might be wiser, and quiet conversations in living rooms between people who thought it might not. But beneath all of it, under the noise and the fear, something older and harder began to stir. It was the same thing that had built the pyramids, and crossed oceans on wooden boats, and split the atom, and put a human being on the moon. It was the part of humanity that had always looked at an impossible thing and said, "Let's see." Factories that had been producing civilian goods shifted over to military production in less than 48 hours. Old shipyards that had been building colony transports converted their lines. Scientists who had been working on agricultural terraforming were reassigned to weapons research. Nobody argued about jurisdiction or funding, or who got the credit. There was no time for that. There was only the list, and the hours left on the clock. Dr. Okafor barely slept. She moved through the command facility in Geneva like a woman who already knew how the story ended and was simply walking it toward its conclusion. She reviewed targeting data. She signed off on deployment orders. She argued, briefly and sharply, with 3 generals who wanted to mass humanity's forces in a single defensive line at the inner solar system, and she won the argument in under 4 minutes by drawing a diagram on a whiteboard that showed exactly why that would be the last mistake they ever made. "They are expecting a wall," she said, tapping the whiteboard. "Don't give them a wall. Give them a maze." On the 68th hour, with 4 hours left on the Council's deadline, Admiral Cole brought the carrier fleet into position inside a hollowed-out comet at the edge of the Oort cloud. He sat in the command chair of the UES Thermopylae and looked at the tactical display that showed the solar system laid out before him like a map of everything humanity had ever built. Every platform, every ship, every silent weapon waiting in the dark. Then the Serenthi Armada appeared. 300 ships. They dropped out of FTL in a wide formation at the outer edge of the system, hanging there like a wall of metal and light. They were enormous, each ship several times the size of anything humanity had put in space. Their weapons could crack moons. Their hulls had been built to withstand forces that human physics textbooks used as extreme examples. They had come to end a world, and they had brought more than enough to do it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Vrethkal's voice came through on the open channel, directed at Earth, clearly expecting silence or screaming. Instead, he received a transmission. It was a recording. A single line of text converted to audio in his own language, delivered in the flat mechanical tone of a translation program. "You came to watch us die. We invited you to go first. The minefield activated. The first explosion came from nowhere. One moment the Serenthi fleet was hanging in perfect formation at the edge of human space, 300 ships arranged in the precise pattern they had used to end worlds before. The next moment, a destroyer on the outer edge of the formation simply came apart. Not from a beam weapon, not from a missile, from a rock, a dense, fast-moving chunk of iron nickel the size of a cargo truck, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light by a railgun hidden inside an asteroid 60,000 kilometers away. The Serenthi had excellent shields. Their technology was 200,000 years more advanced than humanity's in most ways. Their armor could absorb energy weapons and disperse directed radiation. What their engineers had never fully accounted for was the simple, ancient, brutally effective physics of a very heavy thing moving very fast. A kinetic impactor did not care about shields. It just hit. Before the Serenthi fleet commanders could even process what had happened to the destroyer, 3 more ships took hits. Then the mines activated. They were not explosive mines in the traditional sense. They were small, cold, almost undetectable objects seeded throughout the Oort cloud and the outer system over years of careful, quiet work. Each one was anchored to a piece of natural debris. When they received the activation signal, they didn't explode. They fired compact railgun rounds, each one precisely aimed at targeting solutions that had been calculated in advance, updated automatically by the grid's sensor network. From inside the UES Thermopylae, Admiral Cole watched the tactical display light up like a storm. Red markers, enemy ships were flickering and going dark. He kept his voice calm as he spoke to his fleet commanders. All wings hold position. Let the grid work first. We go in when they start moving toward the inner system. The Serenthi commanders were not fools. They had fought battles before, many of them, across hundreds of years of Council military history. But they had never fought in an environment like this. Space, in their experience, was open, empty. A clear medium in which superior force moved freely and applied itself to a target. They had never entered a star system that had been turned into a weapon. They pushed forward. That was their second mistake. Their first had been coming at all. As the fleet moved inward, toward Jupiter's orbit, they entered the range of the gravity lens emitters. These were humanity's strangest weapons devices that could create a localized distortion in space, just large enough and just precise enough to bend the path of a ship's own drive exhaust back toward its engines. For a Serenthi warship traveling at combat speed, the effect was something close to a ship punching itself in the face. Drive systems failed. Navigation became erratic. Ships that had been moving in coordinated formation began to drift and scatter. And then the human ships came out. Cole's carrier fleet was not large by any standard the Council would recognize. 40 warships against 300. But they had not been positioned for a direct fight. They had been positioned for something else entirely. They came out of hiding inside the comet, spread wide, moving in unpredictable patterns that the Serenthi targeting systems struggled to track. They fired in short bursts and moved immediately. They disappeared behind the mass of the comet, came out from a different angle, fired again. They used Jupiter's enormous magnetic field as cover, ducking into the interference zone where sensors went cloudy, then emerging to hit targets that hadn't been watching the right direction. It looked chaotic. It was not. Every move had been planned and rehearsed until it was automatic. Dr. Okafor had designed the combat doctrine herself, borrowing from human military history, from guerrilla tactics, from naval ambush strategy, from the ancient principle that a smaller force could defeat a larger one if it could choose when and where every engagement happened. The Serenthi never got to choose. They were always reacting. By the end of the first 24 hours, 60 of their ships were either destroyed or dead in space, their drives gone and their crews alive, but unable to move. Cole received casualty reports from his own fleet. 2 ships lost, 1 badly damaged. He read the names of the dead and sat quietly with them for 1 full minute before moving on. By the end of 48 hours, the count had risen to 190 Serenthi ships destroyed or disabled. Cole's fleet had lost 4 ships total. It was on the 49th hour that Vreth Kal, commanding from the flagship at the rear of the formation, made the decision that would change the shape of the entire war. He called for help. He sent a priority emergency signal back to the Council, requesting immediate military support from all 46 other member species. He described the situation in precise language that the human resistance was unexpected and severe, that significant losses had been sustained, and that full Council military mobilization was required to complete the Annihilation order. Then he waited, and the Council hesitated. Not all of them. Some of the larger species immediately began preparing their fleets, but others paused. The military action against humanity had been approved by vote, yes. But losing 300 ships to a species that had owned FTL travel for less than 50 years was not something the vote had anticipated. Some council members began asking questions that had not been asked before. Quiet questions, passed through back channels, in languages that the Serenthi monitoring systems were not prioritized to catch. 3 of those questions came from the abstaining species, the Dal Uren, the Osavari, and the Meket, the only 3 who had refused to vote for humanity's death. Their messages did not go to the council. They went to a diplomatic frequency that Ambassador Lena Vasquez had left open before the Resolute made its return to the solar system. She had expected this, or rather, Dr. Okafor had expected it, and told her to expect it. When you hurt a powerful institution badly enough in public, the cracks inside it start to show. Vasquez read the messages carefully. She forwarded them to Geneva with one line of her own attached. It's starting. The remaining Serenthi ships pulled back. They reformed at the outer edge of the system, out of the grid's effective range, and stopped advancing. It was not a retreat in the formal sense. It was the pause of a creature that had reached into a hole, expecting to find something small, and found instead that the hole had teeth. In the command bunker in Geneva, Dr. Okafor looked at the tactical display and the long column of destroyed enemy ships, and then she looked at the 6 names on the list of human dead. She kept her face still. Good, she said, to no one in particular. Now they're angry. Angry species make mistakes. She drew a second line through the next item on her list and kept working. The generals in Geneva wanted to wait. They had won the first battle. The Serenthi had pulled back. The solar system was still intact. Every instinct trained into military command told them to hold their ground, reinforce their positions, and let the enemy come to them again. They had the home advantage. They had the grid. They knew this space better than anyone. Dr. Okafor listened to all of it. Then, she shook her head. If we wait, she said, the council finishes mobilizing. We face not 300 ships, but 3,000. The grid holds them once, maybe twice. It does not hold 3,000 ships from 40 different species with 40 different weapons systems. She paused and looked around the table. We do not have the luxury of waiting. We go to them. Now. While they're still arguing with each other, she called it the 3 strikes. 40 fast attack ships, the lightest and quickest in humanity's fleet, split into 3 groups and sent in 3 different directions simultaneously. Each group had a target. Each target had been selected not for its symbolic value, but for its practical importance to the Council's ability to continue the fight. The first group hit the Serenthi shipyard in the Karen system, the largest military construction facility the Serenthi controlled, responsible for a significant portion of their warship production. The second group struck the Council's deep space communications relay, a hub station that connected the majority of the Council's military command channels across 30 star systems. Without it, coordinating a large, multi-species fleet became significantly harder. The third group headed for the orbital station above Vrethkal's homeworld, not to threaten the planet, but to destroy the station, which served as the Serenthi Arbiter's personal command and logistics center. The galaxy had not seen a multi-system military operation from a new species before. The Council had assumed, without ever saying it directly, that a species less than 50 years into FTL travel would be too new, too unsure of itself, too limited in range to operate beyond its own home system. The 3 strikes happened across 3 different star systems in less than 18 hours. The shipyard burned. The communications hub went dark. 17 Council member species found their military channels dropping in and out, their coordination suddenly unreliable, their confidence in their own command structure suddenly shaken, and the orbital station above the Serenthi homeworld came apart in a quiet, clean explosion that the planet's surface could see with the naked eye in the right atmospheric conditions, like a new star briefly born and just as briefly dead. Vrethkal received the report of his station's destruction while he was still on the flagship, waiting at the edge of human space for Council reinforcements that were slower to arrive than he had expected. His personal quarters, his records, his private strategic archives, all of it gone. For the first time in this conflict, something moved behind his pale silver eyes that was not policy or calculation. It was anger. And that was exactly what Dr. Okafor had wanted. But the strikes had cost something too. Of the 40 ships sent out, 6 did not come back. 2 were destroyed in combat over the shipyard, where the Serenthi defense response had been faster than expected. 3 were caught in the backlash of the communications hub's destruction. The explosion had been larger than the models predicted. 1 simply never reported in, lost somewhere in the dark between systems. Its final transmission. A burst of static that no one could fully decode. Cole received each report separately. He read them. He set them down. He did not share how they felt, because there was no one in his command chair with him, and because feeling it had to wait. He made a note of every name. He would read them again, all of them, when there was time. That was the promise he made, every time. While the strikes were unfolding, Ambassador Vasquez was in a different kind of battle entirely. The messages from the 3 abstaining species had grown into full back-channel diplomatic contact. She now met regularly with Sorek Ein, the Dal Urin ambassador, a 6-limbed being whose species communicated through a mixture of spoken language and subtle color changes in their skin, and who had the most careful, patient mind Vasquez had encountered in 20 years of diplomacy. Sorek Ian told her what she had suspected, and what Dr. Okafor had theorized for years, now confirmed directly by someone on the inside. The Council had done this before, not once or twice. 17 times in its history, species that showed what the Council called accelerated development species, that were growing too fast, spreading too far, thinking in ways that might one day challenge the existing order, had been brought before the Council and voted out of existence. The records were sealed, classified as administrative matters from the early period of Council governance. Most member species did not know. The ones who did had decided long ago that knowing was more dangerous than silence. The Council was not a government built on cooperation and mutual protection. It was a structure built to keep the oldest species at the top and everyone else slow enough to never threaten them. Every rule, every protocol, every careful procedure had been designed with the same purpose, to make sure that what the Serenthi and the handful of other founding species had was never challenged. Vasquez sat very still through most of Sorek Ian's account. When it was finished, she asked one question. "Why are you telling me this?" Sorek Ian's skin shifted briefly to a deep, quiet blue, the color that Vasquez had learned, their species associated with a decision that could not be taken back. "Because my species abstained from the vote," Sorek Ian said. "We abstained because we did not have the courage to vote against. I am telling you now, because courage delayed is still courage, if it arrives before everything is lost." Within the week, the Dal Uren, the Osavari, and the Maquette formally withdrew from the Galactic Council. Their announcement was brief, and made on an open channel every species in the Council could hear. They cited the sealed records. They named the 17 species. They transmitted the administrative files, which Sorek Ian had spent years quietly copying, to every diplomatic channel they had access to. The council chamber erupted. 7 more species went quiet, not withdrawing yet, but no longer responding to mobilization orders. Vrethkal demanded full military commitment from every member. He sent messages that were firm, then urgent, then threatening. Some responded. Many did not. He had 1 fleet left that he could call his own, without the full council's support, 80 ships, the last unified Serenthi military force in the field. It was still more than twice what Cole had available. It was still a fleet that could, in theory, reach Earth and do what it had been sent to do. Vrethkal gave the order to advance. In the bunker in Geneva, the alert came through on a soft chime. Dr. Okafor looked at the display, at the 80 red markers moving through the dark between the stars. And then she looked at the stack of messages sitting beside her console, confirmation from the 3 allied species that their own fleets were moving to join humanity's. She allowed herself one small, tired smile, the first one in a very long time. Then she picked up her pen and drew the next line through the next item on the list. The 80 ships came out of FTL in tight formation, moving fast and with the precision of a fleet that had trained for this exact approach. They arrived at the edge of the solar system, just as they had planned, fast enough to be past the outer defense perimeter, before the grid could fully reorient from its previous configuration, close enough to threaten Earth within a short burn, and in a formation designed to force Cole's smaller fleet into a direct engagement rather than a running battle. It was a good plan. Vrethkal had spent 3 days designing it. It accounted for the kinetic grid, the gravity lens emitters, and the mobility of the human carrier fleet. It had been built on everything the Serenthi had learned from the first engagement. What it had not accounted for was the fact that humanity was no longer fighting alone. The Dal Uren ships came from the left flank 12 vessels, smaller than the Serenthi warships but faster, armed with weapon systems that the Serenthi had never bothered to study closely because the Dal Uren had never been considered a threat. They came in low and quiet, running cold, and by the time the Serenthi formation detected them, it was already too late to reorient. The Osavari came from above the system's orbital plane, 8 ships, heavy and slow but armored in a way that made them nearly impossible to kill, moving like a wall of matter that nothing in the Serenthi arsenal had been calibrated to break through quickly. The Mekhet came from behind, blocking the retreat vector completely. 9 ships in a pattern so precise, it looked less like a military formation and more like a mathematical proof. And in the center, coming out of the comet's shadow exactly as he had in the first battle, Admiral Cole brought the Thermopylae and every ship he had left into the line. The Serenthi fleet found itself surrounded by a coalition it had not known existed 3 weeks ago. Humanity had arrived at a galactic war with 0 allies and had spent the intervening time, between battles and strikes and the slow bleeding of the Council's authority, building a partnership with 3 species who had been afraid for too long and had finally found a reason to stop being afraid. The battle lasted 4 hours. It was not a clean 4 hours. It was loud and chaotic and full of the small, terrible decisions that every battle is made of: which ship goes where, which target matters more, which loss you accept, and which one you don't. Cole lost 3 ships. The Dal Uren lost 1. The Serenthi fleet, caught with no good angles and no viable retreat, lost 27 ships, destroyed, and the rest disabled or surrendered before the 4th hour was over. The flagship was the last to go. Cole sent a boarding team himself, not because protocol required it, but because he wanted to be sure. 20 human Marines in full combat suits cut through the hull at 3 points simultaneously and moved through the ship in careful, practiced patterns. They found the crew in various states of surrender and resistance. They found Vrethkal on the command bridge. He was standing. He had not run. Whatever else he was not a coward. He looked at the humans, filling his bridge with the expression of a being who had lived a very long time and had just, for the first time, run out of moves. The Marine sergeant asked him to stand down. He did. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, a Serenthi arbiter was in human custody. The formal dissolution of the Galactic Council came 6 weeks later. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way old things fall apart slowly, then all at once. Species that had been quiet began to speak. Records that had been sealed began to circulate. The 17 erased species became a fact that everyone knew, and knowing it made staying loyal to the Council's structure feel less like order and more like complicity. The Dal Uren, the Osavari, and the Mekhet proposed the new framework. They called it the Interstellar Accord. It was a document built on a single central idea that the Galactic Council had never been willing to accept. No species has the right to decide the fate of another, not based on age, not based on military power, not based on how long you had been in space or how many stars you had visited. Every species that achieved FTL travel arrived into a shared galaxy with the same right to exist that every other species already in it had. The drafting of the Accord was not simple. Nothing that mattered ever was. There were months of argument and revision and compromise. Humanity pushed for things it did not get. The Osavari pushed back on things that made humans uncomfortable. The Mekhet, who had a political philosophy that no human had fully understood yet, kept introducing clauses that took 3 days of translation sessions to decode. But the work got done, Because everyone at the table had watched what happened when the alternative was tried. Ambassador Vasquez signed it on behalf of humanity on a cold morning in what had once been Geneva's old international district. She signed it with the same pen she had used to take notes in the council chamber on the day the vote went 44-0 against her species. She had kept it. She had always intended to keep it. There was a ceremony. There were speeches. Vasquez gave the shortest one. "We didn't want this," she said. "We wanted to explore. We wanted to learn. We wanted to meet the galaxy as neighbors. We were not given that choice. We are giving it to everyone who comes after us. That's the only thing worth saying." Vrethkal was held in a secure facility in the lunar complex, while the legal structure of the new accord was built around the question of what to do with him. One evening, Vasquez came to see him. There was no formal reason for the visit. She had simply decided she wanted to. He was sitting when she arrived, looking at nothing in particular. The room was plain and clean and adequate. He was not mistreated. He turned when she entered and watched her cross the room and sit in the chair across from him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he asked her, in a voice that was quieter than she had ever heard it, "Weren't you afraid?" She considered the question seriously. She had been asked versions of it many times since the war ended in interviews, in the Accord meetings, by journalists and diplomats and ordinary people who wanted to understand how something like this had happened. She had given careful, diplomatic answers to most of those questions. This time she told the truth. "Every single second," she said. He looked at her. Something behind his pale silver eyes moved in a way she could not quite read. "Then how?" he said. "Fear makes your kind cautious," she said. "It makes us dangerous." He was quiet for a long time after that. She left him there, still sitting, still looking at whatever it was he saw in the plain wall of the room, and went back to work. 1 year after the day the vote had come back 44-0, Earth's new deep space relay network went fully online. It was the largest communications infrastructure humanity had ever built. A chain of relay stations extending out from the solar system in every direction, reaching into distances that the old council had never allowed new species to access. The signal it carried could reach the farthest known inhabited system in less than 40 seconds. On the day it activated, Dr. Okafor sat in the control room in Geneva with a cup of coffee and watched the green indicators light up across the star map on the main screen. One by one, the stations came online. One by one, the distances collapsed. One by one, the dark spaces between humanity and the rest of the galaxy filled with light. When the last one lit up, she picked up her notebook and drew the final line through the final item on the list she had started 18 years ago. Then she closed it, set it down, and finished her coffee. The broadcast went out on open frequency at noon. It was short. It had been written by a committee, revised 17 times, and then quietly replaced the night before by a single paragraph that Vasquez had written alone in 20 minutes and sent to the broadcast team with a note that said, "Use this one." It went out to every inhabited system in the galaxy, every species that had a receiver, every world that was listening. "This is humanity. We are here. We are not leaving. And if you come to our door, knock." The stars, as always, said nothing back, but they were listening. And this time, so was everyone else.